the Green Tea Podcast, everybody! Today, we're having an exciting episode. It is all about the major astrological event that is happening right now, and our psychological astrologist, Emma, will be explaining all about it. How will it affect each sign, including you guys, everyone that's watching? We're going to be diving deep into astrology.
Ooh, yes. Awesome. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening in the stars. There's kind of like a lot going on, but one event in particular that Grace and I have been talking about is the total solar eclipse that's coming up on April 8th. A lot of people are talking about it, even, obviously a couple weeks in advance. But there are definitely reasons why we should be looking out for this one in particular. There are certain things that make it a little bit more intense than perhaps other eclipses that we've had.
So for me, who is like the basic astrology, where most of us are basically not experienced at all with astrology. I just know that I'm a Gemini, Libra rising, and most of us have been watching TikTok, Instagram, and a lot of people are like, you should be scared of your relationships. I heard somebody say that, you're going to be purging all the relationship that doesn't serve you anymore, or starting a new relationship. Like, is that what this is all about? Or is that kind of gimmicky?
Sure. Okay. Oh my God. I love that. So, yes and no. Yes, this eclipse that we're talking about on the 8th of April is falling on the axis of Aries and Libra. And those are the signs that encompass relationships. It's like the relationship axis of me versus we. So in essence, yes, like our relationships are going to be called to the forefront of our lives, I suppose, just because of that. But it will be even stronger for people who have Libra and Aries specifically falling in the 1st and 7th house, which, not to jump ahead a little bit, but you actually do have that at play. I don't. Mine are in different houses. Yeah. So for you, especially, you'll probably notice this happen not just with Libra and Aries themes, but also in the specific areas of your relationships. So just to like back up a tiny bit for anybody who's like totally lost and doesn't know anything about eclipses, eclipses occur when the sun, moon, and earth all like line up in kind of like a straight line, essentially. And there are, without going into too much extraneous detail, there are 3 different types of eclipses: partial eclipses, penumbral eclipses, and then total eclipses. And so, like I said, the one that's coming up on April 8th is a total solar eclipse. And the reason that it's, super intense is because when you have a total solar eclipse, it means that the shadow of like one body totally covers the eclipsed planet. So basically with a solar eclipse, like the moon completely blocks the sun and casts a shadow on the earth. So the other types of eclipses, it's not necessarily like a full coverage thing. It could be like a partial coverage or just like the end casting a shadow. So it's not seemingly as intense. There's not as much that's obscured, not as much light obscured. So that's one of the reasons why this one is going to be pretty intense. And so the reality of eclipses is that eclipses always occur during new or full moon phases. That doesn't mean that every new or full moon is going to be an eclipse, but every eclipse does occur during a full or new moon phase. So the first eclipse that we have, which is actually going to be on the 25th of March, that is when there is a full moon in Libra opposite a sun in Aries. That one is a penumbral eclipse, so it's not as strong. But that one is going to be all about releasing, right? So if you look at your natal chart, you want to look at the house that Libra falls in, because full moons are all about release, and that's how they connect to eclipses. So the reason that I'm bringing this up, by the way, is because eclipses come in sets. Like the total solar eclipse on the 8th is going to be important, but it's also interesting to have more context with that if you think about the eclipse that comes before it. So that's why I'm just bringing it up. So anyway, full moon in Libra, you're going to want to look at what house that falls in, and that's the area of your life where you're called to release certain patterns or ways of being that may not be serving you anymore. So for you, it's interesting because you have Libra in the 1st house, since you're a Libra rising. And so that means that, you're sort of called to look at ways that acting or embodying Libra characteristics is like holding you back. So I know that some of the things that we've talked about before are like, people pleasing and like passivity, or being like maybe a little bit too impressionable to the point where you are now allowing who you are to be constructed by other people, or by the public, or, you know, whatever makes you popular, makes you nice, or perceived as nice and stuff like that. And the fact that it's a full moon in Libra, it also means that there might be, how do I say this? Like, it might uncover aspects of yourself that you have not like fully accepted, or things that you think that you've already kind of like moved past, but really like you haven't. I don't want to say you haven't, because I'm sure in some form you have, but it might just be like lingering residual, like, oh shoot, like I thought I moved past this pattern of like, you know, not speaking up for myself, but now I've run into it again, and I'm like, oh shoot, like that's actually coming up again, right? So for that, yeah, you want to look at the houses. I think that's what's most important in terms of looking at the astrology of this, is like looking at what house Libra and Aries falls in. So for me, just to give an example for someone who might not be in your situation, I have Libra falling in my 6th house, and the 6th house is all about like routines, service, work, things like that. And interestingly enough, the past few like days especially, but I'd say like the past week, I have been feeling kind of like overloaded in my work life, you know, like I feel like I kind of bit off like a little bit more that I could chew in some respect. And I feel that I need more structure and more routine to actually get the things done that I want to get done. So that's where like the full moon is illuminating that area of my life. The 6th house, it's like, bitch, look here. Don't look anywhere else. Like, fix whatever's going on here first before you even try to do anything else. Okay, so that's just an example, again, for anybody that doesn't have Libra right on the axis that it's sitting on for you. And so then after all that happens and we close out these cycles, or we have now brought to our attention all the things that need to go, we enter into April, this really crazy esteemed event, the total solar eclipse. And that is when there will be a new moon in Aries, sitting also on top of a sun in Aries, and also conjunct a north node in Aries. So it's like all about Aries, and it's all about like pushing ourselves toward this new direction. And so again, you want to look at the house that Aries falls in to tell you a little bit more about where you're growing. It will always be opposite the house that you have your south node in. So if we take it back to the example I just gave about you, you have Libra in the 1st house, which means that you have Aries sitting in your 7th house. And so your 7th house, which is the house of partnerships, it could be professional business partnerships, romantic relationships, it's the relationship that you have with the public, that is going to be highlighted, and you're called to embrace certain qualities of, I guess in this case, Aries, to help you in your relationships. So specifically things like, you know, and I know we talked about this before, really speaking up for yourself, advocating for what it is that you need, and not being afraid to like take action toward that, not losing yourself in a relationship, or allowing your relationship to define who you are. It's you show up in your relationship fully as you are, and that will attract the right people to you, versus, you know, showing up as who you think somebody wants you to be, and then realizing once you're in that relationship, like, oh shoot, they thought they were getting this side of me, and I thought I was getting this side of them, and it's like all totally like not right, you know? Now, yeah, sorry, do you have anything to say, by the way? I feel like I just kind of went on, but...
So I can definitely resonate with that, but at the same time, I have a pretty tough question about astrology I want to ask you. I do resonate that I've been having some romantic relationship problems, and I feel like things are being purged out. Things that I thought, like this relationship that I thought was like the perfect relationship of my life, it seems to be not the case. But let's say you've been going through a relationship problem for like the past year. Like, I don't think it makes sense that on March 25th, it's going to be purging. It happens like a couple months or a year before, or is that just a coincidence? What do you think?
Okay, so I do think that like this purging can occur other times apart from the eclipse. I think the idea is just that when the eclipse happens, this energy hits a culmination point. like the point of no return. It's like a pot boiling over, right? So it's sort of like up until this point, yeah, I'm not surprised that you've been feeling certain things or a certain type of way, but it's just kind of hitting this culmination point where we no longer can progress any further if we continue staying in, say, you know, like a relationship that we thought was really perfect, but actually isn't. Interestingly enough, the nodes, the south and north nodes in Libra and Aries, they stay in those signs for a year and a half, basically. And so the nodes have been in Aries and Libra for some time already. And so anybody, especially who has Aries and Libra, but also like other cardinal placements, Cancer and Capricorn, they've probably really been feeling Aries and Libra themes since the nodes went into Aries and Libra, which was like a while ago, like several months ago. I don't actually know exactly the date, which is probably not so good of me as an astrologer, but whatever. You know, the point is that it's been happening for a minute. Chiron has also been in Aries. I know we did the episode with Nurtouch, and I spoke a little bit about Chiron and Aries at that point, which is like the wounds and insecurities that we have around Aries energy. So all these things have already been occurring. And since you have Moon and Mars and Aries and then a Libra rising as well, it's touching those three things in your chart. Even before this eclipse is even occurring, those have already been activated. So the moon is like your subconscious emotions and what you need to feel nurtured. Mars is how you assert yourself, how you take action. Also, like sexual energy is part of Mars. And then, yeah, the rising sign, I mean, it's like probably one of the most important parts of your chart. It's how you've learned to navigate the world around you. So, being that all those placements are quite personal, it also is going to have a very palpable effect on you as well, versus if you had like I don't know, Pluto in Libra or something. Pluto is a generational planet. Everybody born within like the same 20 years is going to have Pluto in Libra, so it may not feel as intense for those people, but for you, because you have personal interaction going on there, it probably does. It probably has been impacting you for some time. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Yes, it does. Another thing that I've been seeing on TikTok and a lot of these astrologists on the short format saying is that, oh, you should be standing up for yourself right now. You know, if the relationship doesn't serve you, you should end it or whatever. But how can this be? Because let's say 100 years ago when people didn't date around and they just had one husband or wife forever, do you end that relationship? You know, I mean, you know what I mean, right? Right now, the way we date is so different than back then. But astrology is still the same because the stars are the same. The sun is the sun, 1,000 years ago or now.
Actually, wow, that's a great question. So I think that actually kind of steps a little bit even outside of astrology and just looks into like human behavior and maybe psychology. I think part of the reason why we stay in relationships like for a long time anyway is just because, like, you know, we're human beings who are driven to connect with others. There's safety also that's found in connection, and I think there's also a bit of like a societal what is the word I'm looking for, expectation, I think, around relationships. You know, something like, oh, if you get divorced, apparently that's like a really shameful thing, right? If somehow your relationship doesn't work out, like everyone somehow looks at that like a really negative thing. And so I do think that that's one aspect of like, why do we hold on to relationships for so long? I think sometimes it's because even if it's something that we know is not really aligned, there's shame that comes from external sources around us by letting go of that relationship. I also think there's just like a fear aspect of like the fear of the unknown, you know? When you leave a relationship, you put yourself essentially in a position where you run the risk, if you will, of maybe not finding what you're looking for after that, or getting into a relationship that isn't actually any like better than the one that you just left. So there's a lot of like unknowns when it comes to, do I let this go or not, right? So I think that's one aspect of it that, again, I don't necessarily think has anything to do with astrology. But I think where astrology comes into play is when you understand the astrology of something, you kind of can use that as knowledge to help you navigate a problem. So instead of being in a situation where, say, you're in a relationship, it's not working out, you're like, shoot, I feel like I gotta hold on to this. I don't really know what's going wrong. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know anything. I'm just gonna like hold on because that's what I feel like I have to do. There's that option, or there's the option of, okay, I'm willing to face and acknowledge the fact that something is not going right here and something needs to change here. So in looking at the astrology, whether for yourself or for your partner, or obviously hopefully both, I don't know, you would be able to say, okay, this is the problem that we're having. Is there a way that I can look at this differently, that we can get on the same team about this thing and work to find a compromise or some type of cooperation in order to navigate conflict more effectively? And so it's actually really interesting that you just asked that, because this is really appropriate for Aries and Libra. The idea of Aries and Libra is Aries is about me, it's about I, and Libra is about you and we, as in the relationship unit. And I think a really high embodiment of like Aries and Libra is understanding that in relationships, when there is conflict, the two of you should be working toward, or however many people are in your relationship, should be working toward the same goal. We've heard this all the time, that it's not me versus you, it's us versus the problem. And there are people like all over the world who will say that that is the attitude that's allowed them to stay married for 50 years, right? Or allowed them to be in a healthy partnership for, X amount of time, despite all this adversity that they've faced along the way, is because they understand that when something comes up, a point of conflict or disagreement, which often can lead to a relationship like unfolding, it's a time to actually, if it's safe, I know there are nuances here, by the way, it's a time to actually lean into what that conflict is and figure out together that two heads are better than one, right? And we can work together to figure out how to move past that. So I think that's what astrology can bring to the table, is more knowledge about how to navigate conflict, instead of just kind of blindly assuming that like you have to stay in something or you have to leave something just because there's an eclipse. That's the other thing. Like, I want to point that out, right? Is just because eclipses are known to bring endings, it doesn't necessarily mean for every single person out there that your relationship is going to end. Like, for some people that might be the case, you know what I mean? But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's going to happen. And I also don't think we should allow that narrative to like infiltrate us before we've actually looked at what's going on in our lives. For example, if I'm not perceiving really any problems in my relationship, or the problems that I'm perceiving are things that I and my partner want to work through, that's great. But if I allow this narrative of like, oh my God, relationships are going to end because every astrologer is saying it, now I start to get paranoid and I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe I'm not right about, like, maybe I was wrong about this, and maybe it really does mean that like all my relationships are going to end because this astrologer told me that that's what happens on an eclipse. I think it can turn into a slippery slope. So yeah, I hope that answered your question. I just think there were like a couple moving parts to that, so that's why.
I think that's maybe, do you think that's the problem with the digital social media astrologist, is that they shoot this narrative that eclipse, rethink about your relationships, many relationships will end. And then I'm like, oh my God, maybe that's why I'm having relationship problems,
Yeah. I mean, I think in a way, social media is great. There's a lot of positives that can come from it, but also a lot of negatives. And I wouldn't say that that's what's wrong with like a TikTok astrologer or pop astrologer per se. But sort of, I think to that point, one of the things that can make things muddy is when someone definitively makes a claim. Like when any astrologer makes a claim that this is definitely going to happen to you, that's when we start to see things get a little bit dicey, because anytime that somebody makes a claim that's that definitive, they are assuming that power, like they're assuming that power. Like, I have the power to tell you exactly what's going to happen in your life. I have the power to dictate what's going to happen in your life as Grace. And if I'm perfectly honest, no astrologer has that power, right? Like, they can give you the knowledge of like, hey, this is what you might want to look out for. But at the end of the day, you are the one that controls how your life unfolds, right? Not some random like astrologer, right? There are things that I've told you that you realize, oh shit, that's true. I'm going through that. Interesting. Check that box. But like, if the entirety of our relationship was me telling you, oh, Grace, like, this is definitely going to happen to you, and this is definitely going to happen to you, first of all, I'm not going to be right all the time anyway. But second of all, it creates a harmful dynamic where now you become reliant on everything that I say to you. Like, your power is now no longer seated with you, it's seated with me, because I'm the one that allegedly has all these answers about like what's going to happen in your life because of the stars. So I think that's that specifically, like I'm hoping that I'm making this clear enough, but that I think specifically is where things start to get hairy. It's not that people are providing this information of, oh, Libra Aries means relationship focus. It's when people start making these really definitive claims that like this is definitely going to happen to you, so watch out, you know, and then they start to like make it a fearful thing. Astrology, it's interesting. I put this in the video that I'm gonna put out too. Astrology shouldn't like strike fear. I think that's like something like I really want to get that out there. Nobody should feel afraid when they're thinking about astrology. Like when you go to see an astrologer, you shouldn't go in there feeling like, oh shit, like I'm so scared this person's gonna tell me something like that I don't want to hear. And I like it makes me think of this one time where I was doing readings and this woman who I've met before a couple times, she came in for a reading, and I was like, "How are you?" And she's like, "I'm good." But I could kind of like, you know, her energy was giving good, but also like not good. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, you seem a little stressed, you know? And she's like, yeah, if I'm honest, like I'm actually like terrified right now. So she's like, I'm good, but like I'm terrified. And I was like, well, why are you scared? And she was like, well, I'm afraid that you're going to tell me something that like is going to drastically impact my life that I'm totally unaware of. And I was like, okay, could you give me an example? And she was like, well, you know, I've been with my partner for X number of years and our relationship is going really well, but I'm like scared that I'm going to sit down with you and you're going to tell me that like apparently he's not the right partner for me. And you know what I mean? Like hopefully that illustrates to you kind of the point that I'm trying to make, which is like, one, this person came in already terrified because she is expecting a deterministic read. She's expecting me to say something like so ridiculous and so life-changing that like it completely like disrupts her reality of where she's living. And so you can see how not only does that just create fear for you as a person, but say that I were to tell her something like that and then it actually happened. Now she also feels not just fearful, but also like her power is totally out of her hands. You know what I mean?
Wow, that's actually really great that you said that, because I know I'm really into like psychic readings, tarot readings, you know, and I go in and I'm like, oh my God, what if she tells me that like the love of my life is not it, or that, you know, somebody's gonna die? And I think a lot of people have fear and lose the sense that we don't have control over our destiny, and that, you know, like you said, with astrology, things are set in stone.
Yeah, and it's so funny. I'm similar to you. I love all things like occults, psychic stuff is really interesting to me. I love to hear predictions, even if sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't really be diving into this. But yeah, I do think that like the same thing applies to psychic readings and things like that, where there's so much power in mysticism. There's a lot of power in like the things that we can't perceive. And so when we come in contact with somebody that allegedly has like these answers, right? And they do have this like connection to these other dimensions or these other like levels of energy. It's equal parts, I think, fascinating and dangerous at the same time, you know? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One thing psychic that I want to comment with you is that we've talked about psychics a lot, and I feel like, to be honest with you guys, I've been seeing the psychic, and she was really, Emma saw her too, and she was very accurate about the present and the past, but there were some immediate future predictions that she gave me that I feel like none of them came true, and that time has expired. Now, she gave me future readings about like later in life, like more like the big stuff, which some, you know, some seem to be true, but some of these like immediate ones didn't come true. And I'm like, what is this? Like, why was I holding on to that? Was it because I listened to my future, it changed and you're not supposed to listen to it? Or is it all fake? You know, like, so I'm having this like second thought about future, because that psychic really did have powers, and she did guess a lot of things that I didn't say anything about the present and the past of what happened. But what is your thoughts on mysticism in psychic and astrology?
Yeah, so I do think that there are people who are naturally like very connected to these like kind of other realms, and they can sort of pick up on, you know, like you said, like future, I don't say future timelines, but like future predictions or something, right? But I do think that like, and I know that we've talked about this before, you and I, like, I think there's a certain amount of things that like people are not necessarily like meant, I don't want to say meant to know, but I think the future is like not set in stone. Like anything that hasn't happened yet, I kind of think we have the ability to like create whatever it is that we want. And so I know that in the spiritual community, there's a lot of talk about like quantum physics, timeline jumping, right? And oh, you know, like I'm in this timeline, but like I'm trying to really get my energy right and do my healing and do my inner work and like do my meditations, and like boom, I jumped a timeline, and now like the future that I want for myself, I'm actually on the path to go and get it. I think there's something sort of to be said about that when it comes to psychics, because like the idea, at least from my understanding, so obviously please, if any of you are actually like working psychics, please like correct me. From what I understand, when you go to say get a psychic reading, they're pulling cards, tarot cards, or tapping into and accessing the energy of that exact moment and the most likely outcome based on your energy at that time. And so should you leave that reading and suddenly decide to do something that maybe when you went into that reading you weren't trying or expecting to do, then it could potentially, for better or worse, now put you on like a different path, if you will, where now that outcome that they thought was most likely is now no longer the most likely outcome. And so it doesn't come true, right? The prediction like doesn't come true. Now, that's just like my theory about it. I don't know if that's like actually true, by the way, everyone. It's just kind of my thoughts, because I think that could also explain then why is it that sometimes someone makes a prediction and it doesn't come true. Okay, well, why do sometimes people make predictions and they do come true? Because maybe like that is the energy that they picked up on. It's very dominant in the way that you are kind of on that path to begin with. And maybe like even if you kind of step sideways from it, it's still like the most likely outcome. You know what I mean? But I think there's a lot that we don't know though, right? And I think that that's kind of what's beautiful about life and like living, is that there are things that we know, there are things that we don't know, and there are things that we don't know, right? So like just being in that space of being able to say to ourselves, I don't know actually, like I don't actually know, and that's okay, I think is a really can be difficult, but a really beautiful place to be. And if you don't mind me adding this, occult themes and psychic energy type of things, that falls in the 8th house, like Scorpio, whatever, house, energy stuff. And one of the themes of Scorpio is surrender. There's a shadow of control and a theme of surrender. So if we apply that to what I'm talking about right now, when it comes to psychic readings and everything I just said about the unknown, we cling to the promises that psychic readings give us because it makes us feel in control. Like it makes us feel like, okay, now everything that was unknown is known. I'm in control and I can do something about this. When we have to potentially acknowledge that we don't know the future and we don't know what's going to happen to us, it feels scary because now we also feel sort of like out of control. Like I have no idea what's going to happen. It could be good, but it also could be like really bad. Oh my gosh, like where are my answers? I need my answers now. So Scorpio calls us into being able to utilize and tap into this more like occult energy, tarot readings, astrology-ish, but like a tarot reading, psychology, all these things, but to not be so obsessed with it that now we need it to survive. Like, you know, like, and I get it. Like there are people who talk all the time about like having an addiction to tarot readings or an addiction to like astrology. Like every time something goes wrong, they're like, I have to look at my astrology. Or every time they wake up in the morning, they're like, oh my gosh, I need to pull a card because I don't know what's going on with my energy today. And they completely outsource, like I said, their power to this modality or this item instead of being like, okay, hold on. This is a tool that I can use to help myself if I'm really feeling like unsure about something maybe, or just I want to play around and see what's up with the energy. But you know, where is that sense of like connection with self, you know? So yeah, anyway, I think that like being able to surrender and say, okay, cool, this tarot reader told me this is going to happen. I don't know if it's going to happen or not. I'm not going to cling to needing this, but I'm also not going to like be fearful that it's not going to come to me. I'm just going to like let it be what it is and let that flow to me if it's meant. I think is one of the most actually crucial parts and crucial lessons that like tarot readings and like all this stuff can teach us, is ironically how to release the need to control everything and to have all of the answers, because there undoubtedly are going to be times when we don't, you know?
And with astrology, like you said, when right now with the whole eclipse thing, we're called to reflect on a relationship, for example. And let's say you don't do that. Ooh, if we don't do what the eclipse or the astrology is telling us, like how would that affect us negatively, positively? Does it not matter, you think?
I think part of that depends on what you believe. You know, if you like really strongly do not believe anything, you know, about like astrology, like related to astrology or energy or whatever, then like I guess hypothetically speaking, like you could, I guess, move through your life and feel like these ebbs and flows, but you don't attribute that to astrology. Like you just assume like, oh, this is just happening because it's happening. So I think that's one part of it. But to talk about like if you do believe in astrology and you know whatever, I think the way that eclipses work is that they're generally considered to be like full moons on steroids. And like I mentioned before, it's this idea of reaching a culmination point where we can no longer hold this energy. Like we can no longer keep doing the same thing without seeing some type of really negative, maybe, effect on our lives or whatever. So if we don't heed the call of the eclipse, it's not necessarily that like bad things are going to happen. But the way that I understand it and also have experienced it is it will just keep happening. Things will continue being surfaced until you actually face them. So that could be good or that could be bad. Like it kind of just depends. So let's do an example here. Let's say that you know, you're called to like release like people pleasing tendencies, right? And you have this tendency to like every relationship you get into, it's like you're searching for yourself in another person. You put this other person on a pedestal because like, oh my God, they're so great. When in reality, it's like maybe they're not that great. You just have a tendency to do that because you think lowly of yourself, consciously or not. Okay. And so say the eclipse comes and goes. It's trying to be like, look at this problem. Like, look at that tendency. And you just brush past it. Like, you're like, like maybe I do that, but like, it's not that big of a deal. You know what I mean? Like I've managed to survive up until this point just fine. You know, my relationships are still fine up until this point. Well, more than likely what will happen is you will just continue to be presented with more scenarios in which you are in the same position, where like you're in these weirdly imbalanced relationships, you feel like totally reliant on this other person, or like you don't have a sense of self unless you have a partner. So the cycle will just continue repeating. I would assume, like if this is say like a negative thing or something that's negatively impacting your life, I would assume and I would hope that like you would recognize that and be like, shoot, I have to do something about that. So like, it's not to say that if you don't heed the call of the eclipse that like something really bad is going to happen to you. It's just like if you don't like learn the lesson, if you will, it'll just keep repeating itself. It's the same regardless of whether or not there's an eclipse, right? Like that's just kind of how like life works. It works in cycles. And there are things I'm sure that you can think of that are not necessarily relationship focused problems, but are things that you struggle with, that you know that you struggle with, you've been struggling with throughout your life, and you've, you know, had pockets where you've figured something out about it, you know, or you've learned something that's been really pertinent and helpful for your growth. I think that's just kind of the reality of it. It's just that eclipses, they really do reach this boiling point with it where it's hard, I think, to ignore at that point. Because I do think that like before an eclipse point, sometimes these patterns are there, but we don't necessarily register them as that serious, you know? Like there's so many times when like I feel like that's happened to me where I'm like, yeah, oh, I notice I do this one thing. And I'm like, okay, cool, like whatever. And then like X number of months later, there's like an eclipse in that sign or whatever, and I'm like, oh shoot, like this actually does run deep. Like this pattern is something that really does run deep, and it is really negatively impacting like my life. And the eclipse just really brings that to the surface. Like there's no more denying it. So I kind of mentioned this already, but like I would like, or the full moon, the moon, whatever. The moon in general is about what's in your subconscious. And so it brings to light, like I said, things that maybe you thought you already handled or that you didn't realize were like sitting in your subconscious. Basically, it brings like what's in your subconscious to your conscious mind, you know?
Do you think, do you have like a part of you where in the past you fixed something because of the eclipse? Do you have like an example?
I suppose yes. I think the thing that I can think of most recently was Taurus and Scorpio eclipse last year. My North and South nodes fall in Taurus South node, Scorpio North node. So when that eclipse happened, I did notice the call to reflect on Taurus and Scorpio themes. And so for me, that looks like a tendency to stay inside my comfort zone, even when it's not working. Like, the desire to stay in comfort that's not working is greater than the courage to leap into the unknown and just to, like, trust that something is going to work out. So that was one of the things that, like, I really started working on and, like, paying attention to is, like, where can I identify places where I know that this way of living or being is not working for me anymore, or this job is not working for me anymore, or whatever. And like, how can I move outside of that? So to give you like a more literal example, even like with business and work, right? Like, I didn't start really doing a lot of stuff with business publicly, especially with astrology, until this year, the start of 2024, if I'm being completely honest. And so last year, I spent a lot of time thinking about it, like, oh, I should do this, like I should start talking about it. But no, I was like, let me just stay in my comfort zone because it's easy here. I don't have to talk about this stuff. No one has to know that like I'm obsessed with astrology. You know, like a lot of those thoughts. And the eclipse happened and it made me really start to realize like, okay, Emma, you can continue doing that, but you're miserable. Like, there's nothing else career-wise that you can think of that you really are called to do. Everything in your body and like your soul is trying to push you toward this and you're avoiding it. So that's fine. If you want to keep avoiding it, like, go ahead. But like eventually it's going to hit a point where it's like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't stay here in this fucking space that I'm not growing, like in your comfort zone, you know? Because like you're in your comfort zone and like growth doesn't always happen there, you know? So yeah, I sort of stepped outside of that and started realizing, okay, I gotta do this. I gotta take a leap into the unknown, start putting myself out there, start doing this, start talking about it. And, yeah. And so now here we are, you know, like however many months later, I'm here doing this because, you know, I had to rectify that within myself and stop just doing the Taurus thing, I guess, you know?
I love that. And that actually reminds me of something my friend recently said to me is that, you know, she believes that the universe gives you the same problems over and over again until you fix it. It's kind of like, you know, in school, if you don't know how to do division, you're going to get that problem wrong every time you get that test until you learn it. And in theta healing, we learned that a lot of the times when we are reborn, if you guys believe in past lives and rebirth, is that sometimes we're addicted to suffering because it's so comfortable and it puts you in that victim position where you seek for help. And that feels good. Let's be honest, you know?
Yeah.
So are we addicted to suffering and being uncomfortable and staying in that, you know? Sometimes suffering is comfortable, basically. And I think that's what I've been feeling recently as well. And growth is painful. It is painful. And this eclipse, I feel like it's hitting me hard.
Yeah.
Now that I'm starting to learn astrology through you.
Mm-hmm. I really like what you said there about like suffering, because I actually do really think that you're right. There's this like collective sometimes what is the word I'm trying to think of? You know, like shared suffering. You know, like when you can commiserate amongst like other people who are also suffering as well, like it kind of brings a sense of comfort sometimes, especially if stepping outside of that suffering is going to require you to leave like a comfort zone, right? Like it's like, oh no, I'd rather just stay here and deal with the pain and the misery. At least other people are here dealing with this too. I'm not alone. We have like a tribal suffering unit here.
Yeah. So, one last question that I had about astrology is that I know we've talked about this, but I still don't get it. Is that, let's say astrology was created back, whatever, BC times, or it was created thousands of years ago, and in the modern age, we've added, let's say, social media, and that relates to Libra or something, or technology relates to whatever sign. Who's gives the right to add to those astrology if it was already like if it's already basically created, we're kind of just adding to it, and how accurate is it as we're adding to astrology as time goes by?
Yeah, that's actually a really great point. And I think it's just being aware of the fact that, yes, when astrology was created, it was created by people observing human and social behaviors. And then so they would, tell myths about like certain characters. And so through these myths, you find like different archetypes, which is what created the signs. Or they would notice, just as like primitive people, like looking at the sky and they see like, oh, Neptune is doing this thing. And they would notice like, oh, in real life, like every time Neptune does this thing, these events happen. And so it's just like thousands and thousands and thousands of years of just like observing patterns, right? But like you said, society has evolved, and even like humanity has evolved since then. So I think it's important to note that, like, yes, these designations for planets, houses, and signs are based on real human and social behaviors that we have observed. However, the designations of astrology are also reinforced by society. So should society start to really evolve like outside of the definitions that we already have, yes, like there's something there that's gonna probably, I would say like maybe need like adjustment. But at the same time, I actually think that humanity like evolving to that point where the archetypes or the signs no longer resonate with us, that's a lot of evolution that needs to occur. And I don't think personally, like within my lifetime, that humans are going to advance or evolve like that much that now astrology as it is no longer resonates. But you make a good point though, because like say for example, Pluto like was discovered recently. In the grand scheme of things, it was a recent discovery. And before that, like there was no astrological designation for Pluto because Pluto didn't exist, right? So what happened was people looked at Pluto and they looked at like the actual characteristics of the planet, like what is this planet like, and what types of things are happening in the world since we have like introduced or looked at this planet. And so they noticed like a correlation with scorpionic kind of like energy, you know what I mean? Even like to get back to your example about like social media and technology and things like that, there actually is like technology in the natal chart. It's Aquarius actually rules the house of technology, but air signs Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius are the messengers of the zodiac. And so I know that we talked about this before, but Gemini I notice is really good with like quick, short format, like say content on social media. They're great at like getting a message out quickly, what's important. They waste no time. And it's very good for like short attention spans and like, like I said, short form content. Libra is really great at connecting with people in a way that really forges one-to-one connections. I know that when we do the podcast, like one of the things that's really cool about watching you is that you really speak to people in a way that makes them feel like you're talking directly to them, even if you're talking to like a camera or like hundreds of people. And I think that's a really awesome skill like to have. And there's also like an artistry about Libra, right? Whereas Gemini is more about just like information, rational, logical as it is. Libra's got this artistry and this beauty to the way that it communicates, and thus, like I said, forms connection, reciprocity, attraction. And then Aquarius is a communicator, but the object of the communication is not necessarily beauty, art, or like digestible information. It's bringing ideas perhaps that have not previously been stated, that forge progress in like a future direction. So interestingly enough though, even people who started talking about astrology like way back when, they still accounted for like technology, right? So in a way, like, it's still very present in the world that like we live in right now. And I think that like when you think about astrology and you look at like the signs, the houses, and the planets, they embody or like they represent ways of being or areas of life that are like just part of human existence. So like for example, the second house rules material possessions. Let's just say material possessions. It's money also, values, but like material possessions. Every human being on the planet right now, even since like primitive times, like being cavemen and then even being like early colonial peoples or whatever, we have always had material items. Whether it was like a club or a bow and arrow that you're going to go use to like, you know, hunt something, or like now today a physical like phone or something that like we use to communicate with other people, or even like at some point the invention of money came into play. That is an area of life that every human being like has as a part of their existence. Does this make sense?
Yes. I guess it's just changed a little bit, but yeah, you're saying the basis of it is still the same. So where do you think AI fits into astrology? Is there like a placement for AI, do you see?
Yeah, so I think AI definitely falls into Aquarius. It's also no coincidence, in my opinion, that Pluto, which is the planet of like transformation, just moved into Aquarius at the start of 2024, at the end of January, and it will remain there for like the next 20 years. And it just so happens that we are also in this time where AI is like the topic of every hot conversation, right? Like you've got strikes going on because of like potential dangers of AI. Like all this stuff, like AI is finally pushing itself to the forefront of our like way of living. And so it's interesting because if you think about AI, the idea of AI is that it's like this supercomputer, right? Like it's like a human being, but better, at least like mentally, like in terms of its ability to like take in, process, and like redistribute information. It's like a computer, like a human computer. So it's weird because the archetype of Aquarius, the energy of Aquarius, sits in this interesting spot between Capricorn and Pisces. Capricorn being a very systematic, governmental, earthy, so very practical sign. The way that we look at existing leaders, so people who we consider like authorities and like authorities, government officials or like the president or somebody like that. And then you have Pisces, which is like this energy that totally transcends the human experience. It's all about like the 5D. So if you compare like Capricorn as 3D and Pisces as 5D, Aquarius is somewhere in between. So if Capricorn represents like human beings and authority, and Pisces represents like just flying orbs, somewhere in between is Aquarius. And so that's why you get this idea of Aquarius being like a little bit alien, right? It's not fully a person, but it's not fully like just a spirit. It's like this weird in between. AI is sort of like similar. It's like this robot that's not like fully human. It has like more maybe mental capacity than a human being does, but obviously like not quite this just like energetic, just a vibration of love. You know, it's still within like this figure of I guess technology. It's interesting because AI is also very like future focused. It's for the future, and Aquarius is known to push and progress toward the future. So I think in some form, like the invention of AI is good because it provides us with ways to like think or do things or create or whatever it is that maybe we didn't have at our disposal before. But obviously, like anything, there's also a negative side to that, which is, you know, that now people are kind of wanting to like replace real human beings with AI, and you know, there's definitely I think a downfall to that for sure.
Wow, that was very interesting.
My last tips for navigating the eclipse is to first, if you can, look up your chart, like actually look at it and see, you know, what houses will this eclipse fall in, and maybe try to like take a look at it and see, you know, do those themes like fall anywhere in my life, or what am I experiencing in these areas of my life, but to not get like too attached to what it says. Just like keep in mind that, like I said a million times already, astrology is not like a deterministic, fatalistic thing. So yeah, just keep that in mind, and also be a bit critical about what you consume. I think we are both contributors. We are both contributors and consumers on this planet. We both, for example, share our opinions, we share content, we do all these things, we contribute something, but we also consume, right? We read the news, we watch things on social media, and I think we have a tendency as people to be very critical about what we contribute or about what other people contribute, right? You say one wrong thing on the internet, everybody cancels you. But we are not always as considerate about what we consume, right? Like, you have control over that as well too. So that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make, is like, if you're on Instagram, if you're on TikTok, and you're scrolling past these videos and it's telling you like doom and gloom, this is what's going to happen for your sign, like, check in with yourself, be critical about what you are consuming. Like, really ask yourself, whoa, okay, like, does this actually feel right? Like, oh, I feel drawn to this and I want to understand what this is. Or do you read it and you just immediately feel like this full body like fear and panic? That's probably a sign that like you want to be careful about consuming that information. Does this make sense? I hope this is making sense.
So that was interesting. I highly recommend that if you guys don't know how to read your natal charts, book a reading with Emma. She is amazing. She will literally go through the specifics and the details.
Yeah, book a reading. I'll link my website, I guess, in the description of the video, just so people don't have to fly around looking for it. But I'll link the description to, I'll link my website in the description. And yeah, I would love to read y'all's charts. It's a really potent astrological time. But yeah, thanks for talking about this, Grace. This was cool.
Yes. How will this eclipse affect you? Thank you guys so much for listening, and follow our social media at the Green Tea Pod, and see you guys in the next episode.
Yes.